Who up switching they stance? Hello everyone, welcome back to Switching Stances. Before we jump into the fights, I got a couple comments on the last episode about Tyler, who I used to do this show with. So I thought I'd clear that up. He's very much retired, does not watch the sport anymore, has no interest in doing a podcast about it. So you're stuck with little old me, I'm afraid. So on with the fights then. We had Manel Kape versus Kyoji Horiguchi. Pretty typical looks from the both of them. Manel Kape with his usual sort of switch boxing, the odd kick here and there, but no intention of grappling, obviously. Horiguchi with his normal karate boxing, long 1, 2, 3, rear body kick, and ducking in on a takedown attempt. Bit of a shame, this one, really, because it's the sort of fight that every fight fan hates to see, because it's one guy getting the better of the other guy the entire fight, and then the other guy coming in and just catching him, or making an adjustment and catching him before the other guy can figure it out, and then the fight's over. It was a bit of a get up Sir Duncan moment where Horiguchi's just on the ground struggling to his feet, and Kape is like pounding him away with uppercuts and hooks to the side of the head and all of that, and it was like perfectly good stoppage, but upsetting to see for a guy who was like obviously outskilling the other. But that's the game, if you have that sort of power and you can make that sort of read. Horiguchi was leaning in too much on his 1-2. He'd sort of throw himself off, and Kape read that and dipped off and was able to reposition himself before Horiguchi was, and just landed that counter right hand and sent Horiguchi spinning. There was a bit of weirdness through the first round where Horiguchi was throwing this lovely body kick from to the open side. Kape was in southpaw, Horiguchi was in orthodox, and it was landing beautifully. And every now and again, Kape would catch it and then try and step in, and Horiguchi would rip his leg back. And it was fine, nothing really dangerous happened off of it, or nothing concerning happened off of it. But Horiguchi's corner immediately were like, stop throwing that. Way too dangerous. Obviously, what they saw happening was Kape catching that kick and then blitzing in while Horiguchi's on one leg and just catching him cold. That sort of thing. The sort of like Matt Brown. Who was it? Diego Sanchez? Where like he has the guy on one leg and he just like smashes an elbow over the side of his head and folds him. That sort of thing, I imagine, is what they saw happening. So it's tough. I'm never a massive fan of corners telling their fighter to stop doing something that is working, but I understand the concern. The concern was definitely there, so it's a bit bittersweet to see that weapon kind of fade out of his arsenal so quickly. But he did bring it back in later on, more sparingly for sure. It definitely wasn't like a major part of his arsenal, but he brought it back in and especially mixed it in with high kicks. There's one point he lands the high kick and then comes in with the left hook, and they both sort of together wobble Kape quite badly. What Horiguchi did have was that lovely karate boxer right hand. He loved it from his sort of long normal stance, but also as a takedown threat. He'd launch it as a sort of a post single at Kape's face, and then catch the leg and bundle him over, and that was how he ended up with something like almost a whole round's worth of top control. He'd also really like that long right hand as sort of a web zip to get into his clinch. He'd sort of throw it behind Kape's head, or if it missed, he'd catch behind Kape's head and pull himself into a clinch, which is something like Rob Font does a lot with his jab. It's great if you have the sorts of long weapons that require that kind of commitment, to be able to catch behind the head and use it as a way to both smother yourself from their counters and also continue to get your own offense on them and get close to them and be able to grapple them, all of that. Horiguchi's lead hand was also completely on point. There's such a lovely left hook. You could barely even register it as a punch. He sort of just trots it out there so gently, or it appears to be so gentle, but it wobbled Kape a few times, I think. It sort of sent him stumbling. One of the times was after a high kick. He high kicks, Kape tries to reposition on the outside, and Horiguchi slaps his lead hook out there and Karp's legs go, and he sort of stumbles his way back to the fence and has to sort of spend a bit of time resetting. Really impressive. It's such a, like, no tell on it at all, but such a beautiful counter. On Karp's part, he spent a lot of time sort of boxing from southpaw. So he'd come in a lot of the time with this long southpaw left hook and put his feet level. He'd almost sort of shift through it, almost like a Poirier shift, but instead of actually shifting, he'd bring his feet level and then he'd lengthen it back out into his normal stance with a southpaw lead right hook. So he'd sort of very quickly cover a lot of distance with that. Didn't necessarily land it a lot, but he threw it a lot, and he did land it a fair few times. I think he wobbled Horiguchi in the first round with it a little bit. Horiguchi recovered very well. But it was really just that dipping right hand. Dip off to the right, and then came back up with the right hand as Horiguchi was out of position, and just caught him, and that was that. That's the game. So what's next for Karp? You've got to think it's going to be title shot. You've got to think it's going to be the winner of Van versus Pantoja. Both are really fun. You either have two strikers or you have a rematch of a fight in which Pantoja just sort of outdogged him. So interested in both for sure. And then for Horiguchi, you're thinking maybe somebody like Brandon Royval. You're thinking maybe the loser of Van versus Pantoja. I think the Pantoja fight's a hard sell because they were going to fight for the title, but they are like friends and training partners. You got to think as two elite flyweights, you've got to think they probably spend a lot of time together. So it's like it's awesome for the fans, but I'm not sure they're particularly keen on fighting one another if it's not for UFC Gold. And then Navio Sterling versus Ion Cutelaba at the co-main event was usual sort of light heavyweight ridiculousness, especially Ion Cutelaba ridiculousness. I thought he fought a good fight. He looked big and strong, which is kind of what you can count on from Cutelaba. Some nice guillotine attempts. He looked big and hulking, and some nice kind of throws on the fence from Cutelaba. Sort of connected underneath Sterling's waist, stepped across with his right leg, and swung Sterling off the fence into topside control. Sterling kept trying to attack these single legs, which let Cutelaba attack the gilly. But at some point in round 2, it just looked like Cutelaba imploded. It was a very odd, because he was fighting normally and quite contentedly. As contented as Cutelaba ever looks. He's a bit of he looks like he's stressing out sort of the entire fight, even when he's winning. He's got that sort of physique about him. It's similar to like DDP, where everything looks like it takes an immense amount of effort, but he can just keep going. Apart from in this one, when he couldn't just keep going, it seemed he got reversed by Sterling. It looked like Sterling landed a knee when Cutelaba came in, but he seemed to fight it pretty well, and Sterling reverses position, wrestles up against Cutelaba against the cage, and then stands over Cutelaba and lands about 20 punches on him. In the process of which Cutelaba looks completely vacant. He doesn't fight it, he doesn't try and stand, he doesn't submit, he doesn't roll to his knees, there seems to be nothing going on. He just sort of sits against the fence and takes the punishment until it stops. It's very, very odd to watch. He looked quite weird. Hydro Emil versus C-Rod. C-Rod hit the classic Alexa Grasso double finish with a high kick and then a guillotine. Beautiful, beautiful work. Obviously trying to wrestle Emil, but not committing too hard to the approach. And if Emil was able to scramble out of it, he'd happily just break with a punch, which we love to see. Just annoying people with that sort of transitional offense like Merab does. And then through the whole fight, he was landing these head kicks, sort of with the toes, and Emil was pulling back in a straight line from each one of them. And you could just feel them coming closer and closer and closer. And it could have totally been one of those fights where the moment that you see coming never comes. But it was not one of those fights. It absolutely came. Emil takes a head kick terribly, falls to his knees, slumps, looks like he's out. C-Rod jumps on top of him, and Emil, almost on autopilot, hops on a single, tries to wrestle up on a single, to which C-Rod quite happily locks up the tightest guillotine you've ever seen. Genuinely looks like he's put his head in a chopping block. Locks it over the neck. Just absolutely no space at all. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. And Emil goes to sleep. Lovely stuff. Wouldn't mind seeing C-Rod back in the rankings pretty soon. I think he's been ranked before, right? He's had the sorts of fights that would get someone ranked at that weight class. I think he's got a win over that little BJJ kid. He's quite young. I can't remember his name. Paul Hezis Jr., that's the one. So yeah, wouldn't mind seeing C-Rod back in there against a more known competition. I mean, Haider Emil's known, but like a name in that weight class. It's featherweight, right? It is featherweight. Magomedov versus Bagdasaryan was over as soon as it began, basically, with a Scottish twister, which was lovely. Really, really nice variation on it, where you instead of grabbing behind the head and pulling, you use the inside body triangle and you kind of crunch the shoulder, sort of do like an Ezekiel choke grip over the shoulder, and use that instead as the guy tries to turn into you from the back. Laura Sanko's got a really good tutorial on it, which I watched before recording. And I've seen Kaposa saying this has been pretty big in Japan. A lot of guys in Japan have been doing it. Oliveira versus Fili, or Lockdog versus Fili, I suppose I should say, because there's a billion Oliveiras. Was great, great fun. Really, really like Andre Fili. He's just been cool forever. One of those guys, kind of a gatekeeper to the top 15. He's been in the top 15 before, I think, but this is kind of his position now, where if you beat him, you're legit, and if you lose to him, you're slightly less legit. But Fili had a blinder of the first round with that rear body kick, that open side body kick, just pounding it away into Lockdog. Hurt him a couple times badly, like badly. Terrible, terrible reaction from Lockdog. You also had Lockdog trying to kick the calf, and in the first round, Fili checked one really nicely and looked, again, absolutely horrible for Lockdog. Just looked in tremendous pain, stumbling all over the place. Gave Fili the type of 10-8 round where nobody actually gets dropped, but the other guy is just in such visible pain for the entire round that you have to score it as dominant. But then he locked in, started pushing Fili to the fence more, had a really nice use of the kick where he'd have Fili against the fence and he'd kick the leg, he'd kick Fili out of stance with the inside kick, and whilst Fili was trying to reposition, he'd come in with his long punches and then into a combination, into his sort of big hooks or whatever he wants to do. But it was what we were saying last week about Eamon Zahabi versus Sean O'Malley, where Zahabi was kicking Sean out of stance and Sean's legs were going all over the place in all directions. And that was it. Sean was allowed to just regain his stance, whereas Oliveira here was kicking Fili out of stance, and whilst Fili was regathering his base, he'd be hitting him, which is exactly what you want to see. Really, really cool. And then Oliveira just melted Fili towards the end. Just these big swinging hooks from his waist. Obviously felt no threat back from Fili, and rightly so, because Fili didn't throw anything back after a certain point, as you do when you're getting finished and you're hurt. Just kind of melted him. Some lovely 12-6 elbows. And there was some complaint over them being in the back of the head. I didn't see it all too well, but I don't know. Fili didn't complain, and it was amongst a finish. It wasn't like Fili looked like he might have recovered without that. Like Pereira looked like he did everything in his ability to recover, but Garn kept pounding the back of his head. Fili looked like he was probably done, regardless, which is no discredit to Fili at all. If you're done, you're done. But it didn't look like if any elbows did hit the back of the head, it didn't look like they were particularly fight-altering in their foulness. Kevin Borjas, the Meta AI Flyweight Champion of the world, took Andre Lima's O in quite a fun little scrappy fight, or scrappy on his behalf. Andre Lima sort of marched him down, very, very low activity, tried to stay long even when he had Borjas cornered, which just allowed Borjas to dance out of the way. Borjas is one of those guys who may not get the wins, but he gives everyone a tough, annoying fight. He seems like a real fucker to fight. He gave that tough one to Joshua Van, famously. And this is his one where he finally gets the win. He gives Lima the tough fight and also gets the win. because Lima just didn't do enough. Seems to think he did do enough. Seemed pretty convinced that he was doing it. I guess because he had Borjas on the back foot the whole time. But Borjas obviously did more work, was landing lots to the body. Borjas keeps his hands. Sorry, Lima keeps his hands very high, sort of pinned to his head as he walks forward. And Borjas found that and was just landing right hands to the body, like a 1-2-3 to the body. That's those sorts of punches. Whilst Lima didn't really do enough to put him off. And it was quite frustrating because Lima, when he was throwing, he was landing. Borjas would sometimes keep his chin quite high in the air, and Lima would obviously just crack him with something. But it was just so. It was immediately masked by Borjas doing 3 things for every 1 thing that Lima does. So, unless you're really, really making an impact, you are just going to get out-volumed. Mitch Raposo quite impressed me against Alam Nascimento. Quite a cool little. He looks like a little hummingbird. Really, really fast, always moving that lead hand, sort of these shaky feints, and moving laterally all the time. He'd be changing his direction constantly as Nascimento tried to back him up against the cage. Nascimento found the calf kick at a certain point to try and cut Nascimento off as he's moving around, but he abandoned it so quickly that it never really made an impact. And Nascimento was just trying to land these individual jabs, which Raposo was too fast for. Raposo would so happily just move out of the way and use them as a counter opportunity. And these were one-offs. These were individual in-and-out little counters, and none of them particularly seemed to bother Nascimento especially, but it's still more than what Nascimento was landing. There was a moment, I think he went back to his corner in the third, and the corner were like, you just need to land a front kick to this guy's face, and then it's over. And it seems like a baffling bit of advice, really, when your guy is 2 down, quite clearly 2 down. I don't see how you could have given Nascimento one of the first 2 rounds, even though one judge did. But I don't see how, front kick to the face is not executable advice, surely, for a fighter. Not a lot more to report on the prelims, to be honest, and I'm not going to long it out too much because it's wickedly hot here in the UK. So I'm just going to wrap it up, and we will be back next week to talk about Fiziev versus Torres. I'll have to watch some Torres because I'm not too familiar on him. Fiziev is a guy who's fought everyone, to be honest. I mean, not everyone, but enough people at lightweight where you will definitely know a bit about Fiziev just through osmosis. You know, if you watch RDA, if you watch Justin Gaethje, if you watch Mauricio Hufi, those guys will tell you something about Rafael Fiziev. And also he's like a great fun fighter to watch anyway, so it's not like you have to particularly slog your way through his career. Interested to see what happens there. I think it's quite a good main card with sort of a prelims of who, but it should be fun. And I'll catch you guys next week to talk about it. Cheers. So yeah, I'll catch everyone next week for that card. Take care. Lots of love.